Welcome to Successful Living with Bill Napick. Every week, we talk with interesting people in a variety of professions for ideas to enhance your success in all aspects of life. Successful Living with Bill Napick starts right now. Here's Bill Napick.
Welcome to the Successful Living Show. I'm Donnie Boutwell, your guest host, and we have the privilege today to have Gary Thomas on the show, best-selling author. I'm going to read a little of your credits here for a minute, which is overwhelming to me. He has written over 20 books, selling over 2 million copies around the world. Incredible. Translated into more than a dozen languages. International speaker, truly, I would say, an influencer in the church in America and around the world. He's a teaching pastor at Second Baptist, which is how I know Gary now, being at church there, and he's our writer in residence. He is an adjunct faculty member at Western Seminary in Portland and at Houston Theological Seminary. I think it's just a privilege for me to get to sit down and have this conversation with you in my house. Thank you for being in my house.
Thank you, Donnie. I'm honored to be here. I get to see where all this happens.
Yeah, you had an influence on us and our marriage before we ever even met. I'll have to try to compose myself through this because I'm the kind of guy that cries at butter commercials. But this is the book that first had an impact on us, which is called Sacred Marriage, that we read when we first got married. That was just, I would say, instrumental in understanding how to be married and have a good marriage. And that was just amazing.
And little did you know that you'd end up being in the next several. Now I got to try to write a book where I don't mention you guys.
Well, and there was another thing that you did for us before we became friends, and it was in 2013. You were preaching on a Sunday night at church, and you said to the congregation, if you have not taken time away with your spouse, you need to make a commitment to do that. And we had been married for 8 years already, and we were really poor when we first got married and had never been on a honeymoon. And Jacqueline said, okay, I guess we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to spend the money and do it. And we did, and it was and so then we decided honeymoon would be an annual event after that.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, incredible. So,
you never know if anybody's listening, but at least 2 people were.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Successful Living Show, as you know, is about careers. How do you get into what you do?
Right.
And I think being an author is a real mystery to a lot of people. Was there ever, growing up, some aha moment that was like, okay, that's the thing I want to do with my life?
I'm one of those where, yes, I'd say by the time I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a writer. I loved books. I loved to escape. I'm not very much an introvert. I'd go into my room. And the reality is, Donnie, there's nothing that anybody would pay me for. I am a man of a very limited skill set. I can write a book. I can give a talk. I can't do anything. I can't fix your lights. I'm not very good at washing dishes. Frankly, my wife says I make more of a mess than cleaning it up. Not very good with numbers. I don't like to be in charge of people. So I'm really glad the writing worked out. It was really the only life I could imagine.
Was there somebody growing up that influenced you that direction?
Well, I loved to read. Really was just carried away by that. I thought it'd be fun to do that, so I thought I'd kind of do fiction. I had some teachers that really encouraged me. I remember my 6th grade teacher just pulled me aside and said, Gary, how did you're so young, how are you learning to write like this? She must have been in high school, not 6th grade. It must have been high school. And I think it's just from reading so much and finding that escape that you just kind of absorb.
What I love about your speaking style is the storytelling. I was taught that when you speak, you should have authenticity, vulnerability, and narration. And when you go into a story, you go into the story, you say, Joe was walking down the street, and you build the landscape, you create the space of that story, and you draw us into it. You don't start with, I'm going to tell you a story about Joe. You don't do that. You narrate as you bring us into that.
The would-be novelist wanting to come out. But I just find people's lives fascinating. My books, as they've progressed, like the book that's coming out next year, is mostly stories. I interviewed couples. I said, tell me, what did you learn? It's about couples going through just difficult times. One lost their only child. The guy was a weightlifter when he got married, was diagnosed with MS 2 years after they got married. just all kinds of issues like that. One, the wife had an affair. It fascinates me. Okay, what led up to it? How did you get through it? Looking back, what would you say to other couples? For me, it's the stories are where it's at.
How did you, or was there a transition where you decided that you felt like you were called to talk about marriage and family?
Well, the breakthrough of writing was really tough for me. Jean Auel, older people would know her, it's Auel, wrote a trilogy that was hugely successful when I was a teenager. Something, The Clan of the Cave Bear or something like that, or three of them. I can't believe she hardly ever wrote since then, because there's still millions of copies, just real breakthrough. And she said, the writers that make it are those that need to, not just want to. That it can be so difficult if you just want to, you're going to give up, and that was me. I went through an 8-year stretch where I was just desperate to get something published and got nothing. I had right after
8 year?
Right after college, I got a little gig at a local newspaper where I would do, and like $20 a column. But I loved it, and they loved it, but they just didn't have money or a budget for it. And then I had to do real work, and so I was trying to do it on the weekends, which meant you wake up at, for me, it'd be 4:30 or 5 o'clock to work before I go in and work 8 hours and then work on weekends, because I needed to. It's like I just really couldn't imagine any other life. So I had 3 books out there, and they did okay, but I was nobody. I mean, I was in my 30s. My first book was published when I was 34, I think. And so, it just didn't do that much. 95% of books sell 5,000 copies or less.
Wow.
So as an economic model, it's not a very promising if you're not in the top 0.5%, you spend a year writing a book that sells 5,000 copies.
It's like being a songwriter.
Yeah, you better, people say, what do I want to do if I want to become a writer? First job is marry somebody who's rich. I mean, that really helps if you want to do that. So, but I got those 3 out there, and they did enough to where publishers would keep publishing me. And then on marriage, I wrote Sacred Marriage, and it was just different. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist, so I couldn't write the how-to, 5 steps to a better marriage. I didn't know. But what I did notice, my first books were on spiritual formation from a Christian perspective. How do we grow closer to God? How do we become more like Christ? Well, the thing that was turning me more and more into that and challenging me more and more was my marriage. Wow. I just felt like I was seeing a side of me I hadn't seen before I got married that I didn't always like. I always thought of myself as polite, and suddenly I could be irritable. I thought of myself as patient, and could be very impatient, and all of those things. I was just like, my gosh, I just didn't know. And so I'd never seen somebody address it from that perspective. And so that was Sacred Marriage that you mentioned. And the subtitle is really what saved it. I owe whoever came up with this decision so much money. My subtitle, it was so bad. When I sent them, my subtitle was Celebrating Marriage as a Spiritual Discipline, which is kind of what it is. But then they drew a line from the inside of the book. What if God designed marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy?
That's what that was the message that I took from it. That, and that's Christianity too. It's not just about God making you happy. It's about Him changing you and making you better.
Yeah. And it's not instead of happy, because I think holiness preserves happy. I think people who are addicted, who are negative, who are materialistic, they're not happy. They're driven. They have moments of pleasure. I don't think they're happy. But that subtitle, I can't tell how many people said it's what stopped them. It's what made the book take off, because it was different. Yeah. I admitted the difficulty of marriage, and back then Christian books were sort of like the 5 principles of Jesus to have a happy, deliriously happy, and people said, no, that's just not true. And I was willing to say, marriage is really, really good, but it's rarely easy. Even the best of marriages have their difficult days, but God can use that difficulty for a good thing. That's right. To help us to become more like Christ. So that book just took off. And not the first year. Most books will sell 80% of their copies in the first 4 months. They have the big promotional push. Yeah. And so like Hollywood books and people that go on those circuits, they're going to sell 80% of their copies first 4 months. Okay. My books have been the opposite. Sacred Marriage sold more the second year than the first year, which is almost more the third year.
They're cult followings.
With no more marketing campaign. It was just word of mouth.
Wow.
And then So I did another one after that, wasn't related to marriage, but then the publisher comes to me, and this is finally to answer your question, where did I get into marriage books?
Yeah.
I don't want to write every book on marriage, but I'm sort of like the baker who really wants to make croissants, but the croissants go stale and everybody buys the donuts. At some point, if you want to stay in business, you got to say, okay, we sell mostly donuts.
The thing, I may be passionate about skateboarding, but I'm terrible at it. I may love that, but I may be very good at building cabinets,
So you're going to, if you want to feed your family,
Yeah.
And so, because my marriage books usually will sell over 100,000 copies.
Well, it's your giftedness at writing this, even though you may also like to write about running one day.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and I tried one book, Everybody Matters. It wasn't about running. It was about physical fitness as an act of Christian discipleship, that because our bodies belong to God, we see our bodies not as ornaments, which is sort of the world's approach, but as instruments. I think it's important, but those books just don't even come close to what the marriage books do as far as sales. And my publisher wants to recoup their investment, so they're always pushing me toward marriage.
Take me through the professional author. What is the work day like for you? What kind of disciplines do you incorporate?
Well, I've talked to so many authors, and it's different for everyone. I'm an obscene morning person. I say obscene because I actually feel relieved if I wake up and it's 4:30 or later. I'm usually up before then. I try to stay in bed till 4 or 4:30, but usually by then I'm up. I have my time with the Lord, which I think feeds everything. I'm reading scripture, praying through that. Then I like to read from the Christian classics. Because I just like to get out of my century. I like to get out of my tradition, sometimes out of my gender. I'm reading ancient women, ancient men who believe different things. I think you got to be creative and you got to keep sharp, and they really challenge me. So I'm reading, and then I read a contemporary book that's relevant to my life in some way. After that, then I get into my writing. I have an hourglass, and I want to have really solid, intensive work, 3 flips. So at least 3 hours of really solid, generating creative work. Now, people say that doesn't sound like much, but I'm kind of ADHD, I think, a little bit. And the hourglass really helps, because I can just... And you can get a lot done if you're solidly concentrating for 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm interviewing somebody, reviewing a manuscript, I'm going more than 3 hours. And I usually can work 12 to 15-hour days.
The phone's off, nobody's ringing.
Yeah, it's
totally
hardly anybody's
isolated.
awake.
Yeah.
Which is why I like to do that. People aren't awake to bother me.
Yeah.
And Lisa will come in and say hi and whatnot. So I'm working much more than 3 hours a day. Like I said, now that I'm an empty nester, maybe 12 to 15, but it's email or putting together PowerPoints or interviews. This is my 3rd interview today.
Wow.
So you've got those other, but I really want to preserve, and my assistant knows this, in the morning for my creative work, that's pretty sacred. I really won't want to schedule anything before 10 or 11.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say I'm an aspiring author listening to this right now. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
I want to be published. Who do you pitch to? Who are the players?
Yeah.
What kind of people have to get on board for something to come out?
Well, it's really discouraging, but I don't want to discourage them because the odds are it's just not fair.
Yeah.
But look, if I could get in, who had no reason to be published, anybody can, so they shouldn't give up. But it changes all the time. The answer used to be, create a blog. You have a certain number of bloggers. Publishers will come to you. Now blogs are kind of dying. You can have a successful, that's not going to necessarily do it. The easiest way to get published is to be famous for something besides writing.
That's how music or acting is.
An athlete. You become famous and they say, well, then write us a book. And look, I did my share. Before Sacred Marriage, my books didn't sell enough to feed my family. And so I would work with celebrities. And there was one who was very famous in another field, and I'd done a couple books with this person. And then the publisher suggested another book. Hey, why don't you do a book on prayer? They didn't ask him, do you have anything to say about prayer? Do you have anything new to contribute about prayer? It was, we know you're famous. We know we can sell this amount of books.
Yeah.
Why don't you do a book on prayer? Which bothers me because you might see somebody who has a lot to say about prayer, has some fresh... And they won't even get looked at because nobody knows who they are. But again, if you go back to that, I don't just want to be a writer, I need to be a writer. you'll work through it. So, I mean, podcasts are a way. People are getting known. Blogs used to be a good way because you could practice and deal with it. But I would say from the mechanics, however you get into it, publishers are basically looking for your platform, which a lot of writers, including me, don't like because it's a whole different thing. Do you have a bunch of Instagram followers, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it might be? Are you traveling around the country speaking to others or whatnot? What they're just trying to figure out is, how do we sell a book that's written?
You already have a name.
By you.
Yeah.
And so if you head up a conference where you're speaking around the country, a lot of women's books have done really well this way. We go to 6 different locations. We have 50,000 people coming there saying, okay, fine, we'll sell 10,000 copies at this event, and so then it adds up. But you've got to show the publisher, okay, how can I be in the 95% that sells more than 5,000 copies? You really want to hit. To keep getting contracts, decent contracts, you really want to hit 25,000 copies is basically the industry norm. If you can move 25,000, you're going to have somebody that will publish you, maybe not the biggest ones. And just frame of reference, like literary fiction. I love to read literary fiction. A lot of people respect literary fiction. 10,000 copies sold could be good literary fiction. People just don't read that much anymore. Huge bestsellers like The Exorcist might have sold 4 million copies back in the day. And now people just don't read that much. When I was first starting out, I always got great encouragement from taking plane trips, because 90% of people were looking at, well, here, you walk down a plane today, 90% are looking at a screen. They're playing a game on their phone, they're watching a movie, 5% are reading. So it's tough.
So I'm looking at your career from the outside, and I see that you had established yourself in a season when social media began to pick up.
Oh, way before social media. My first book was 94. So there was no social media.
So then there had to be some transition for you. Did somebody sit down and say, Gary, you got to get on social media?
Oh yeah, they did. As soon as it was there.
And what was it like trying to learn that and learn how to do that?
Well, it was brutal when Twitter only gave you 120 characters instead of 240.
I mean, clearly you've done well. You have 30,000 plus followers on Facebook. That's incredible.
I mean, I know people that have 5 times that, so it doesn't. But it's been slow for me because I'm not famous outside of what I do. I mean, I've been on a lot of radio programs and a couple of different kind of television ones, but...
Are you actively working on social media every day in your workflow?
Yeah, but I use Buffer, so I'm not interacting as much as I should. That's the critique I always get. You should interact with comments more, but I can load up Buffer in an hour for maybe a week's worth of posts on Twitter and Facebook and do that. But I'm not 100% sure it's worth it. I just don't know. I'm afraid to not do it. But I've had so many people say, Gary, you got to do a podcast now, because that's how I go, look, I'm doing social media to try to sell my books. I've been doing a blog, which is a dying art to sell my books. And now I'm doing a podcast. So I'm doing 8 hours a day to try to sell a book when I want to write it. I mean, it's just, at some point you want to say, what's driving this thing? I don't know. I have a tenuous relationship with social media. I feel like I need to be there. I'm not sure it's the best for my soul or for my mind, because people can be,
Do you have somebody that helps you? You mentioned assistant earlier. Is there somebody that helps you think about, how do I manage my time? I'm in a season where I finished a book. I'm trying to promote that. I'm working on a new book. How are you dealing with the different pressures and prioritizing where there's only so many hours in the day, even for an empty nester, to figure out what to do with your time. How do you do that? Is your wife helping you think that through, or are you struggling with that?
Well, not very well would be the short answer. I'm not the best. I'm great at deadlines. I'm not clinically OCD, but I live in the neighborhood right next door to it. And I love to write. So finishing a book deadline is almost never an issue for me. If I'm preaching a sermon, I pour myself. I just can't dial it in for a sermon for whatever reason, because I think God's word is important,
Yeah.
because I want to connect with the people, because they're giving me time.
Listener, I really appreciate the effort you put into those, for sure.
Well, I think, and in a place like Second, where you got thousands of people, I feel like these are thousands of hours where they could be doing something else.
Yeah.
I owe it to them, and I owe it to, I think, the truth that God gives to say, I want to present this in a way that is engaging and true, but isn't wasting your time. So I guess it's, Donnie, I just say because I'm driven, I get done what I need to get done, but other things can lack. I mean, some people might be offended. They might have sent me an email 4 months ago and will finally get a response. Because I'm not, my job isn't to answer email. I try to, but I can get behind. And if you write me a letter, good luck. This sounds terrible, but it's so, I'd probably do better with a manager. I love to do the creative work. It's not discipline for me. I'm driven to do that. It's the other thing. It's the letters, the email. Lisa really helps me with all the travel. That was huge. When we became empty nesters, she took on car rentals, air reservations.
In our business, we have different roles. That people have. There's a CEO, CFO, CTO, project manager, service manager, installer. We have all these different levels, and I'm looking at your industry and your life. What are the positions? Who's doing what in your career to help things happen? Are you wearing most of the hats, or who else helps?
Yeah, I am. Well, my wife has become essential as far as for my traveling, because I do a lot of speaking as well as writing. And I can't even imagine doing it without her. She gets the car rental. She sets the plane reservations. She makes sure it's the hotel. When I leave, I've got a list of, okay, here's where you're going. So I don't even think about that kind of stuff. I'm just, where am I? Your Enterprise. Okay, I go Enterprise. Where's the hotel? So that saves me a lot of time. And I have an assistant, Allie, who has been fabulous. One thing, she's just great with people, which when they're representing you as they're talking to churches or events or colleges that are having me speak, I just really appreciate that they love her. She's nicer than me. So it's just nice that it gives you that. But she just I have a complicated schedule because I have events here at the church, but then outside, and then podcasts. And so she does a great job. She knows when I want to have things scheduled. She doesn't ask. If it's really special, I'll do something in the morning, but she really tries to push them in the afternoon. And so I get all these things from my publisher. Can you do this podcast and this? And I don't even answer them. Allie answers them. I'm just like, okay, great. That really does create productivity for me, not to just have to do that. So then the podcast, I'm just literally 15 minutes before. Okay, who are they? Trying to get to know them a little bit and then doing it, but I'm not... Nothing else. How
did you, did somebody approach you and say, you know what, Gary, we could take this book and turn it into a weekend-long event, and we could invite hundreds of people and lives could all be moved at the same time? How did you get into doing these big events with books? People have done that very well, and I haven't. My marketing is pathetic. That I've gotten where I am without better marketing is God's mercy. And I wish I was better at it. I mean, I should be. I'm upset with that because I've seen people market it so much better. My marketing is answering the phone. A church will have read a book and said, hey, will you come and speak to us about it? That's how it started. And because it's just me, a one-person shop, I get more than I can handle just by responding. If I was more intentional, and I'm really thinking about that now at this stage, is I'm thinking what I want to do. Instead of big conferences, we're thinking about some other things. I'm thinking about, well, what if we planted some in strategic places and had a different focus? Right now, it's just, they do everything. They say, we want you this weekend. We'll invite people. We provide the refreshments. I'll talk about the schedule with them. Sometimes they want one night, sometimes Friday night, Saturday. What content do they want? And we'll talk about that. But I do want to be more intentional. People that are intentional make a whole lot more money. But that really hasn't driven me. Well, I think about Dave Ramsey. I mean, he's got awesome events like that,
He's Mr. Intentional.
Yeah, and he's taken to turn those events into video series that can be sent out too. Have you ever considered doing something like that?
I've done it, but then I have these videos, but then I just don't know how to get them out. But now this last book, Married Sex, I did with co-author Deborah Fileta. She's in her late 30s. And it's why I like working with younger people because they're just smarter than me on these things. Because she'd been at a number of online conferences. And so she said to launch this book, it came out in October, let's do an online conference. We invite other speakers who do a part of it. And then we have these videos and then they have a year to watch it. Hugely successful.
Wow.
But it was 100% Deborah that did it. I mean, I did a couple videos and I invited people to come in and then I invited my social media people to participate, but it was 100%. It couldn't have happened without Deborah. And that's when I started to realize if I would just be a little more business-like intentional, man, I've missed a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
But Don, I'm going to be honest, I don't know that I can. I could hire somebody like a Deborah, which I think I would have to do. Yeah. I just don't think I have the marketing gene in me. I'm really a 100% content guy to a fault.
Right.
I love creating content. Anything else, I don't know if it's the ADHD, I just have no patience or interest for. I go to a business meeting, people talk about budgets, I'm just like, can I cut off a finger and send that to the meeting instead of me? I mean, it's just, I couldn't do what you do with that whole thing about hiring people and the budgets and all that. It would just be, it's overwhelming.
I just hire smart people and I ask them to ask questions with each other and then they decide what to do.
But see, you have to hire them. I don't even want to have to hire the people. That's why I've stick with Allie for a decade. And when I find somebody, it's just like, I don't want to go through the process of hiring. It's for life.
Do you actually have like a favorite of any of the material that you've written, content you've written, that you would just say, if somebody's never heard of you, read any of your content, that you would say, this is the one, start here?
It's like asking somebody if they have a favorite child.
Okay.
I mean, they're all special. The book, Thirsting for God, will always be special to me because it was the first one. It was originally released as Seeking the Face of God. I got to redo it for a modern audience because short chapters have to be short. Every decade, publishers are saying chapters have to become shorter. Books have to be shorter.
Yeah.
But that's on the Christian classics. And I'm just weird. People just don't get it. Why do you read old dead men and women? But I just find so much insight. It's a delight. It feeds my soul.
Yeah.
So that's Sacred Marriage, though, helped feed my family. It made writing possible. It sold over 1 million copies, and so I'm getting paid for work I did 20 years ago.
That's cool.
I mean, writing doesn't pay a lot, but when you're getting paid for a bunch of books that were written years and years and years ago, and then it adds up, you're like, oh, okay, it's sort of like the insurance salesman. It's really tough to sell insurance at the start, but then they get the policies going, and then by year 20, I don't want to insult them, but it seems like they have their assistants do everything, and they go golfing, and they go to Lions lunches, but it's those years of getting up to there. Yeah. If your books sell, then you get the royalties. Now, I think they said 90% of books don't pay royalties, so you can't count on that as right. But so, Thirsting for God is a big one because it was the first one. Sacred Marriage because it really made writing possible. But it's usually the one that Sacred Pathways is the way it's been used to help people look at how they relate to God in different ways. Cherish was special for me because I'd written a lot of books on marriage, and yet it just really, it took off. People said, this is fresh. And I'd already done 3 or 4 on that, and to feel like, okay, I'm not done yet. It's sort of like the guy who's recording an album. Yeah. And he records a good album. You think, is that it? Is that my best? Am I done?
This is my context, that I spent many years in the music business. And so, the whole thing, royalties and all that, and, co-writing is, I can only relate it to the experience that I've had. Is it when you get this publishing deal, I assume you're having to give up, a lot of royalty to publishers and all that. Does it work like music?
Well, I'm not sure how music does, so I'll tell you how books work, and you can tell me. And now it's changed. It used to be an advance would be 50% on signing and 50% on publishing.
Is that like an upfront stipend for you to live on?
They give you they give you a certain amount.
Okay.
And so you get 50% of that as soon as you sign, and then you get 50% when the book is published. But that's an advance. It's called an advance on your royalties. There's
You got to
certain
pay
royalty
that back
right
on the sales.
And like early on, I've seen some first-time published writers have nothing. They might give you an 8% royalty. So you get 8% of the books.
Which is projected of what they...
And then you have to earn all of that back before you start to get royalties. Now, I'm at a stage where my royalty rate is probably going to be, my agent can tell you, probably starts out around 20% or so. See, that's a big gap from 8% starting out to 20% now. But you got to have an agent that does that. And then, so the book's got to sell a certain amount of copies, and then once you've earned back your advance, then for every copy you sell, you get those royalties back. But again, most books won't sell back there in advance. Now, it's changed to where now it's 30% on signing, 30% on delivering the manuscript, and 30% on publishing. And some publishers even going 25, 25, 25, 25. So it's like 6 months after the book is published or the anniversary. So the publishers keep trying to put less money up front. I think the thinking of advance was...
book sales going down?
Actually, the COVID 2020 was a pretty good year for books.
Okay.
But...
are they needing to make a higher cut in order to stay in business?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's like any business has to figure out. Publishing has still been a little more protected than music, where people don't usually get a book for free. Some publishers, I have one, David C. Cook, like once a week will give away a free book. And I've had that where they'll give away my book for free to generate sales after that. But it's not like music where, like, when Kanye West's first album, where he had a lot of Christian songs, Lisa and I listened to it that day for free.
Yeah.
And it kind of bothered me.
Yeah.
I thought, why should I get to listen to this in my car for free? Why don't I have to buy it to listen? Just because it's one who has to create content. I thought, how does this work? And I don't know how he got money for that. I guess, I mean, you could explain it to me better. Publishing, at least, people are still kind of buying, I mean, not so much in libraries, right? But that's not a big percentage of sales.
I imagine that some of the things that you have written about over the years have been difficult. When I first read through When to Walk Away, I thought this is a really tough topic.
Yeah.
And as a Christian pastor, you know, you put yourself out there to say, you know what, Jesus chose to walk away from contentious people, you know, and that was really interesting to me because I'd never heard that take, you know, from a book, Christian book, or the pulpit before, and it was really eye-opening to me to say, you know, boundaries are healthy for Christians to have. How difficult was it to approach that topic, and what kind of research did you have to go through in order to come up with When to Walk Away?
I was the least likely person to write that book. I've been a people pleaser my entire life, to a fault. I mean, it's pathetic how much I want people to like me, or certainly in the past, even more. And it really came about from my own situation with a toxic person that I found out was just undercutting me, lying about me, and I just thought, I'm not important enough to give this much attention to. I didn't get what was going on. In this case, he was a believer. So I have a good friend, wiser than me. He's been marriage and family therapist for 35 years, knows scriptures, loves God. And he knew some of the situations, said, so what should I do? And how do I respond to him? How do I challenge him? What way honors God? And he said, Gary, my recommendation is that you don't engage him at all. And I was mystified, Don. It's not like I came with an answer. I'm like, how could that be scriptural? And he said, go to the book of Luke, count how many times Jesus walked away from someone, or let somebody walk away from him without giving chase. Well, when I respect somebody to tell me that, I'm not just going to go to Luke, I'm going to go all four Gospels. Those that don't know the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I wrote it down, remember the OCD part. I had 41 citations where Jesus interacted with somebody, and it ended with Jesus walking away or the other person walking away, and Jesus didn't give chase. Not all with toxic people. And because some of the Gospels refer to the same event, some are talking about the same occurrence. So I'm not saying there's 41 occurrences, but still a couple dozen.
A lot.
Where Jesus, and it was eye-opening to me. Okay, so here's here's the blindness that we can have. I can't count how many times I've read the New Testament. I started reading the New Testament when I was 8 years old. Mm-hmm. I was in Sunday school, great Sunday school teacher, really young Sunday school teacher, gave me what was radical for the time, Good News for Modern Man. Mm-hmm. It was a new translation, it's easy to understand, and it had stick pictures in the Bible. That was that was just controversial, stick pictures in the Bible. And it's great because I like to read it. Mm-hmm. So I can't count, literally could not count how many times I read the New Testament. And I was dumbfounded. Mm-hmm. How did I not see this? Mm-hmm. And then seeing his example, passages like Matthew 7:6, don't give what is holy to dogs or cast your pearl before swine or else they'll turn and tear you to pieces. Mm-hmm. And as Jesus said, how many times had I read that? Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that Jesus is saying, go on the offense, share your faith, be sacrificial, love, but learn to play defense. There's some really bad people out there. Mm-hmm. You can't make dogs polite. When Jesus was referring to dogs, the first century Jews didn't keep dogs as pets. Mm-hmm. Egyptians did, not Jews. So dogs, he's not talking about Fifi or Fluffy or Lassie. He's talking about nasty vermin. Yeah. Just snarly, matted, furred dogs. And swine, well, he's talking to Jewish people. Yeah. How did they look at pigs? I mean, the whole... And so he's saying there are people like that spiritually, mm-hmm. where you could give them a pearl that is so valuable. He talked about the pearl of great price. You sold everything you had to get that one pearl. There's nothing wrong with the pearl, but they're so spiritually dead, they'll actually resent you and attack you for giving them something very valuable. Mm-hmm. I wish I would have read When to Walk Away 30 years ago. It would have saved me a lot of grief, trying to placate toxic people, trying to understand them instead of just walking away. But I was able to see Jesus' words and practices in a way I had been blind to. I'm embarrassed at how blind I was. So that book, I was writing it for me first. Wow. And was amazed at all the scripture. I thought it would be a short book with not a lot of scripture. I think When to Walk Away may have more scripture in it than any book I've written, which shocked me. Yeah.
Well, it's, I had somebody say to me, I was going through a dysfunctional period in my life in my 20s, and I was hanging out with some people that were not a good influence, and I had a good Christian friend of mine say, why are you hanging out with them? You should pick your friends. You don't let them pick you. And that was like a foreign concept because I also grew up with that, wanting to just make everybody happy, people pleaser mentality. And so that message has been very healing for me to hear that I don't have to make everybody happy. I can't make everybody happy, and that's just okay.
Let me add to this. But if this program is about being successful, the whole point behind When to Walk Away is a life that creates fruit, that your life produces something. So if people want to be successful, they know you've got to prune unsuccessful encounters out of your life. The toxic people will discourage you so you don't find joy in your work. If they take away your joy, they'll make you weak. If they gaslight you, which is what toxic people do, then you think, well, I don't have anything to share. And so if you let toxic people take away your confidence, your joy, and your peace, you're not going to be a successful person.
That's right.
You're just going to go climb in a hole and try to... And so that's why I think when I saw it as, I thought, to be successful, I had to be nice. I never had to think I'm nice. Now, I don't think we should be a jerk to anybody. There's a difference between being nice and being accommodating. If I want to be successful in the term of producing fruit, I've got to prune the bad fruit. I've got to prune the people that destroy my ability to produce fruit out of my life. And that's why I think we have to walk away from toxic people, because if somebody's keeping me from producing fruit, then my first step is to stay away from them.
And it doesn't mean that you're not trying to be a positive influence in the world and to people. I tell my children, you have your circle, and you can share your heart with the people inside of that, and you can be kind to the people outside of that, but you don't have to let the people outside of your circle determine how you feel about yourself. Tell me about the new book, Married Sex. Give us the 1-minute elevator pitch. What is the thesis? What is it about?
It's co-written with Deborah Fileta. She's a younger woman in her late 30s, a licensed counselor, and here I am. I was in my 50s when I wrote it. I've slipped out of my 50s now that we're talking. And I've been a spiritual writer and pastor. And so what we want to do is create a book for Christian couples. It's very much based in Scripture. So if people don't want to read a Christian book, they won't like it. I'm just going to be honest, because that's our appeal. It's to Scripture. But we wanted a woman's view and a man's view, a younger couple's view, an older couple's view, so we could provide a psychological, theological, and practical guide to having the best married sex of your life. We had a private Facebook group where a lot of couples just shared fun, practical tips. How do they keep it alive? How do they reinvent the spark? How do they keep the passion and intimacy going? We interviewed some couples on our own where they were so free to share their stories. So we felt like it really has everything that a couple needs. Again, some people need the theology. Is God okay with it? How does he celebrate it? Deborah provides the psychological tips. Here's how you get over this. Here's the healing. And then just practical advice from other couples. This is what we found that worked. I'm really pleased. You know, when you do a book as a collaboration, I imagine in any business, you're not sure, how is this going to work? And sometimes it really clicks, and I couldn't have been more pleased. I thought Deborah did a brilliant job, not just with her chapters, but helping me refine mine. Gary, women are going to read it this way.
Well, I love that there's some banter in there where you'll finish a section and she'll say, and I listen to the audiobook because that's more exciting to me to hear your voice, you know.
It's tough to read the book.
Tell me.
It's easier to write it than to read it.
It's just brilliant. And so I'm listening to it, and then you give a lesson, and then there's a note from her, and then she'll give a lesson, and there's a note from you with that. So you get some really great balance and back and forth banter in there. But I just have to ask, when you said to Lisa and to some friends, hey, I'm going to write a sex book, did anybody say, are you kidding?
I wish they would have. I have my regrets, because sex is such a deeply personal, even explosive reality in our lives.
Yeah.
It's so easy for people to get outraged and offended.
Sure.
There are things that we just never explore about ourselves sexually, and just all of our desires don't always lead to a healthy place.
Yeah.
And we can respond to that with unhealthy repression, even not wanting to mention if something's wrong. I think you can also have unhealthy indulgence. If I desire it, I shouldn't deny myself. Well, that could lead to ruin. I'd look worse than I did if I just ate everything I wanted to eat. So it's a minefield. So I was really glad to write it with Deborah, because we could balance each other. And then I would just say to other people in business, what I found really helpful at this stage, working with somebody that's younger was really energizing on a lot of ways, about marketing the book afterwards, getting her perspective. And I'm really at this point in my career. I've gotten to write over 20 books. Nobody deserves to write 20 books. Nobody has that. I mean, it's just, I recognize I'm very blessed in that. But I realized a few years back, I felt like I could try to become the tallest tree in the forest, the best known author, or I could try to plant a forest. And that if I just want to become the tallest tree in the forest, and when I die, but if I'm planting a forest, like investing in people, younger writers, because it was so hard for me to break through. I mean, it was just so heartbreaking, those 8 years of straight rejections. So if I can help others, I feel like I can take a little bit of credit. And throughout my career, I've been looking for younger people. And I just say to business people now, it's so fun. If your realty practice is succeeded, just throw a favor to a young realtor and just invest in them. If your auto business is doing well, give some, it's a lot of fun when you reach a certain point when you don't have to be competitive. When you can say, I've had my fun. I still want to keep going. It's still fine to be ambitious. But I just say, throw a few bones. And then maybe that's a way of, just give a step up to some others that would like to be where you are. I mean, just think, famous singers, what it would mean if, I think what Elton John did for Kiki D. Her career, I know I'm using people that are from the 70s, or people, who are those? But Kiki D had tried to go, she just couldn't make a go of it. And she was just kind of put out by her label, and Elton John said, no, I'm going to sign her. And then she did okay, and then she did a duet with Elton John, and it was, I just thought, what a great thing to do, to just take your success and say, I I want to let you come along with it.
That's really good. Why is there still such a taboo in the church in 2021? How can we help the church to wake up that sex is something incredible, wonderful, God-given? How do we help the church change their mentality? Obviously, put out a book like this. But why is it still such a taboo in the church?
Look, I think there are a number of people, and I don't mean this, they're not all women by all means, but there's a lot of women who feel like the teaching of the Christian church has been misogynistic, that sex is for the man, for his pleasure, for his release, or he'll sin if you don't give him enough sex and it's your fault. They've been so damaged and so hurt, they're really angry. And so they are looking for that, and they want to call it out. And I think sometimes it's valid to call it out, but there's a certain thing as a malicious reading.
Yeah.
And this last weekend, I mean, a guy that I have tremendous respect for, and I've heard how one of his passages has been twisted. This is just insane that anybody could think he's saying what they're accusing him of saying, because especially when you're talking about sex, it's easy to ridicule. I've seen people do it with novelists when they write sex scenes, and they said the worst written sex scenes. And I read a lot of fiction and literary fiction and whatnot. And you read through it and I go, you're making fun of it, but it's hard to write about sex without, it really is. And it's easy to be a critic, when somebody's trying to do it. So some people are trying to communicate, I think, good truth. And other people who have never tried to do it are telling you, well, you could have done it better. You should have done it this way. You should have done it that way. What I don't get, Donnie, is the anger in the sense, well, I get the anger because they feel like they've been hurt and other people are going to be hurt.
Projecting going on? Like I've been hurt by someone and I'm going to project that on you.
And you're the reason for it. And I just think, I don't force anybody to buy my book. I don't tell anybody to read my book. And I would say to somebody, if you think you're triggered on a book about sex, don't read it.
Yeah.
Or if your marriage isn't in a place where you want to have more sex, don't read it. You may need to have a book that helps you deal with relational hurt or other issues before you read a book about sex. But we just live in a day and age where I think sometimes people redefine what's wrong with a book instead of what's right. And I've just been far more comfortable in my own wide reading. I can read a book and totally disagree with half of it, but if I get something new, I'm thinking, I'm not going to attack it.
Yeah.
I don't expect to agree 100% with a book. I don't know why I'm reading it if it doesn't cause me to think.
I wonder, do you think that people can even, it's a ridiculous question, can people have a healthy relationship and an unhealthy sexual life, or can they have the opposite, an unhealthy? And
let me put it this way. I've seen some couples where because of age or disease or an accident, sexual activity was, a woman had a brain injury that just made it very problematic. And they still have a wonderful, now that's different than it being a relational issue where one is withholding and the other is frustrating. But let me put it this way. If you have an all-star sex life and you have great sex 3 times a week, but a miserable marriage, you're probably still headed for divorce. Because if you add it up, 3 times of sex in a week is still less than 1% of your marriage. And most people wouldn't put up with 99% misery for 1% great fun. And so I don't think sex on its own can save a bad marriage. On the other hand, I think you can have a good marriage, and if there's a lot of sexual frustration, it can threaten the marriage so it doesn't feel good to one or maybe both of the partners. I think sex helps a marriage fire on all levels. I think it's worth working for. I think we can make too much of it. I think we can make too little of it. Some couples, I think, let it die way too soon. And I think that's really sad.
So what's step 1, 2, 3 to get out of that?
Well, number 1, I think, is understanding the importance of sex for a relationship. In the book, we try to say, number 1, biblically, if you have biblical prohibitions, God celebrates it. And God even says, let your, Song of Songs 5:1, eat your fill of lovers, be drunk with love. The sense of even losing, just being intoxicated with your desire. That, okay, it's a good thing. If my God says it's good, I want to do it. And even to men, I think it's helpful because guys are so afraid of lust, and we should. Porn is devastating to our souls and to our marriages. But the way the Song of Songs and Proverbs talk about a man delighting in his wife's body, not a woman's body in general, but his wife's and her beauty and what it does. And so the Bible gives you permission to be carried away, that she's so beautiful. So I think get biblical permission. I think secondly, understand the relational dimensions, that it might not be sexual. One woman said to me, Gary, if my husband would just pray with me, he wouldn't be able to handle me in bed. She goes, he'd be crying uncle long before the night is through. So what she's saying is, before you touch my body, touch my soul. If we're spiritually connected, I'm going to melt. Another wife said, in contrast, I'd love to have a great sex life with my husband, but here's the problem. Here's why I never want to. Everything I do is wrong. I don't drive right. I don't clean right. I don't raise the kids right. I don't do anything right. So now at the end of the day, when I'm really tired, he's criticizing me in bed, and I just can't stand there. There's one more thing to disappoint a man that can't ever be pleased. So she wants a great sex life. She doesn't want to be criticized. You have to deal with the criticism to save the sex life. So I think you got to deal with the relational issues that could keep it. And Deborah has a great section. This is a relational issue. This is a sexual issue. And so it's just kind of figuring those things out. I think if you look at it at the holistic level, usually a lot of those sexual issues will take care of themselves.
Yeah. Tell us what's on the horizon, what's next, what are you excited about that you're working on beyond this book?
Well, yeah, it's always funny because I'm usually finishing up a book when the other one is, this book hit the shelves October 6th or 8th or something like that, and my other book was due October 15th. So you're always kind of, and the next one is Making Your Marriage a Fortress, and it's about how couples grow together through difficult crises. I talked to you about it before, a couple that lost their only child. Grief often pulls them apart. How do you draw closer together? The guy who had MS, a wife who had an affair, a couple, they were just too busy during raising small kids. One, what happened during COVID to their relationship. So just trying to look at how couples looked at real life challenges that most of us have faced. Said, we're not going to let this pull us apart. How does it draw us closer together? And the lessons they learned. And it was fascinating for me. It was really fun, really based in stories. And so I learned a lot. I was surprised at how many takeaways. I always say, a lot of people say they want to write a book. Just about everybody has a chapter in them. They have a chapter's worth of wisdom. And so I would go to these couples who are wise. Tell me your chapter. What's been your biggest challenge? What did you learn? What would you share to others? And it was fascinating.
Thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us. It's been really incredible privilege to talk to you today and learn more about your life and your career and these wonderful books.
Thank you, Donnie.
You've been listening to The Successful Living Show with Bill Napick. I'm Donnie Boutwell. Our guest today has been best-selling author Gary Thomas. If you'd like to find out more about Gary and his work, just visit garythomas.com. You can order his new book, Married Sex, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever books are sold. Please tune in next week when Bill returns for another exciting edition of The Successful Living Show.